Good morning, everyone. This is Ron. It's Sunday morning. Hope you had a good weekend so far. We'll go ahead and get started and see if we have any questions on yesterday, and I'll ask Pastor to recap in a minute. Uh, we talked about chapter 4 of Matthew, and he was explaining those temptations, and so I'll let him give you a little more detail on those. But we ended looking at vulnerability, which I thought was a fascinating discussion. And so Pastor, you mind recapping us and see if we have any questions? Then we maybe go back into this if no questions lead us in a different direction.
No, not at all. Um, we were talking about the verse 6 where it talked about Jesus being tempted to cast himself down from the pinnacle of the temple, and we talked about his response to that, and really, what happened is he was carried to this place in his mind where he had a vision of who he is, and 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 um, and once he saw that, his carnal mind or his natural mind was saying, "Well, now since you know who you are, you can do anything you want to." And meaning that when it says you can cast yourself down, um, and the angels will have charge over you unless you strike your foot or your foot against a stone. And we understand that this is talking about um, remembering when you know who you are, you remember, you also are brought into remembrance that uh, simply because you're aware of being divine entity and divinely inspired, it does not give you a license to do anything that you want to do with the expectation of remaining in that state of spirituality. And we talked about um, him being, uh, I'm sorry, him telling Satan to get behind him, talking about um, really saying, or return to your own place or level, or I'm not going to submit to this distraction. Um, Dealing with how, telling us how easily it is for you to be blind to the reality of the light that you have been shown, and and showing us how we are to deal with it, those distractions, disallowing those distractions to become a major force in our lives that pushes us to do things that we have already been doing in terms of our our material thoughts and desires. It helps us to move beyond the religious principles that we grew up with, that we had been taught. This is more applicable to those who are seeking to understand the essence of who they are. But also, if we note, and I did not mention this yesterday, but if we note that Jesus dealt with those who were in the beginning religious people, excuse me, he interacted with those who voluntarily came to hear him speak. But as far as Jesus interacting with people who were not interested in religion, or who were not interested in anything spiritual, uh, those are the people that we don't necessarily see him engaging with. The overwhelming majority of his engagements are with people who who are religious and seeking to move to a different place. The lady with the issue of blood, meaning that the life that was being drawn out of the feminine energy or femininity, that was saying, I've done everything, I've tried everything. I've tried religion, I've tried doctors, I've tried introspection to find out what's going on with me, and nothing helped. And when she touched the outer essence of his being, everything in her changed. So he's showing us in all of these events that we speak of in regards to him, that we have the inherent power to bring, to heal those things that beset us. And that is spoken of very loudly, actually, when it talks about the ministering angels having charge over us, these unseen forces of power that brings us or guides us to the light, and that light or enlightenment begins to expose to us the energy forces, the power forces that we were created with for the express purpose of bringing balance to the earth. And then, as Ron said at the onset, we began to discuss, had a great discussion on vulnerability. And in doing so, we concluded that it is our vulnerability that opens us up to be receptors of the truth, meaning also that it is our vulnerability that allows us to be brought to a state of memory so that we can know beyond the shadow of any doubt who created us and what purpose we're created for. I'm done. Questions, comments? Charles?
I know I might know it, but when he said, when Dad said jump off the rock or whatever, so the feet won't dash against the stone, but then he tells himself, thou shalt not tempt the law of thy God. Give us understanding of that.
When he said, cast them down, what happened is Jesus, keep in mind, this is an internal thing. And Jesus was dealing with himself internally. And when he was listening to his soul, his mind was functioning as well. His mind says, look at you. You're elevated above everything. You see all of this light. You've been enlightened. It's now that you know who you are, this means that you can do anything. You can put your name on a marquee. And I'm speaking in our, the way we speak today. You can put your name on a marquee and you can fill up a church. Now that you know who you are, all these marvelous things that you are seeing about yourself puts you in a position to do anything you want to do, and no harm will come to you because of who you are. I mean, you have angels monitoring you to make sure you don't hurt yourself, which means that, which is actually saying that Jesus was, godly. He was talking about, when he talked about angels, was the powers that he had when he was created. And Jesus is saying that it doesn't work that way. I'm being brought to a remembrance of who I was created to be and who I am to be in this earth. And that is not someone who receives enlightenment for the purpose of making a profit off of it or for the purposes of manipulating people. It's for the purpose of enhancing the growth of humanity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions or comments about that?
I have a question. So is this the self having a conversation or a dialogue with the ego? The ego telling them that you have all this and, you know, if you have all this, if you bow to me or something to that nature?
The way I see this, and someone else may see it from a different perspective. From what I see in this, it is what the Aramaic called the stinging mind, the mind that seeks to distract you from your spiritual journey. And if it's the stinging mind that you're dealing with, then what you are actually being guided by is your soul. So Jesus was being guided by his soul, but the mind was telling him that he didn't have to do all the things that his soul was telling him to do. So when you talk about ego, I here lately have been stepping back from ego a lot because of its origin, and I have I prefer us looking at the mind versus the soul, because when we look at the scripture, it talks about the renewing of your mind. It doesn't talk about the defeat of your ego. It doesn't talk about being able to control your ego, or it doesn't talk about putting your ego in check. It talks about the renewing of the mind. And the reason I use these words is because these are the words and principles that people are familiar with. And it is easier to get people to see the picture that we are painting if we use the terms that they are most familiar with. Does that help you, Evan?
It does. It makes sense.
Okay.
I'll just leave it right there. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing. What I had said, it was his ego to do what he want to do.
Oh, yeah, it's his mind telling him that you can do anything you want to do. Is it egotistical? Yes. But again, I make every effort to use the word mind. And so do I use the term ego? Yes, I do sometimes. But it's because of
Habit.
Yes, habit. Yeah. So
yeah. I agree with what you're saying, Pastor. You don't reach a state of vulnerability by listening to your mind. And that is, I guess, the journey that we all take. You move to a place where you want something, you desire something so bad that you make room for it. And the room that you make for it is still in your mind. Moving that part out of the way, because that part is always talking to you and trying to distract you, I guess, for lack of a better term. So the power of vulnerability to me is you don't move to a place of understanding truth or even seeing yourself if you don't deal with your mind. So yeah, I didn't think about that until we had the discussion yesterday. The power of being vulnerable, and I think even that is partly what keeps people from seeking truth, is that can be a bit uncomfortable when you recognize that you are dealing with portions of self that you may not have ever dealt with before, that you come face to face with who you are. That's the part that becomes uncomfortable to us. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because the mind actually deals with what our eyes see. The mind functions on what we see with our eyes, what we experience in the material world. And the mind is what we battle with when we began to see spiritually. Why? Because the mind makes every effort to analyze everything logically. And spirituality is not necessarily logical when we look at what logic is and the origin of logic. We cannot logically explain how our infant is developed in the womb. We know it's there. We know it does do that. But what is it that takes this zygote and bring it to an embryo and end up being a human? What is the logic? How is there logic in what we call dead leaves, giving life to something that's already living or add to that life? The logic that we use to process things. If someone does something to you, the logical thing to do is get back at them and stop them from coming at you. However, the scripture says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Those kinds of things. And the difficulty is I see for people to understand it, the more education you have, the more difficult it is to embrace spirituality. Because the more education you have, the more you make every effort to break everything down to its least common denominator. You make every effort to logically explain everything. We don't even know what life really is, other than dealing with it is energy, but what is life itself? So, and that is the reason we can have these mega churches with people in them who are listening at things that make absolutely no sense, and they don't question it. Because what's happening is most of the people who lead these mega churches, they are life coaches, or they are people who engage with people in order to encourage them to face the material world that they live in, but not from a spiritual perspective. And the people who are listening have been trained to listen to and follow a logical progression, when spirituality is not necessarily a logical progression. Does that make sense, guys? Questions or comments? Ron?
I remember some time back, we talked about this from different scripture, of course, different perspective, but I remember, I think we were studying the Lord's Prayer. I can't remember what, but Sheldon was teaching, and Sheldon said, primarily, if I remember, people can't see, you look at this as giving up something. You can't see what you're going to gain. You can't see that you're gaining more. And I see now why, because as you explained the logic of it and the five senses, and that gives you something concrete to hold on to and something even of value. So you do not see the value in the spiritual things that you are released or are uncovering. And you can only, your logic only shows you that these things that you see are what's going to bring you comfort in things that you can value in there, and there lies, I think, the difference.
Also, when you mentioned giving up things, we have a totally wrong perception of what sacrifice is, and we talk about giving up because that's what we've been taught. Let's just face it. We don't talk about transformation. Suppose for a moment that sacrifice does not mean that you give up anything. Suppose sacrifice means that you are transformed as opposed to giving up something. And you say, well, tomatoes, I'm sorry, you say that's a matter of semantics. And I'm saying it's not, because if we think about giving up something, that means we are losing something in order to gain something. If it's transformation, it means that all of the things that we've held on to, all of the experiences that we've had, has guided us to this place of transformation. And what's happening is all of those things we thought were true are being transformed into what truth really is. And that in itself transforms us, as opposed to us losing a part of who we were. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good
Go right
morning.
ahead.
Hi, Audrey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
We can hear
Audrey,
you.
can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I don't hear who's talking.
We can hear you.
Audrey, it's Ron. Can you hear me? Oh,
Keep going
Pastor,
out,
say
in and out.
Okay.
Are we breaking up? Because I can hear Ron clearly. I can hear Audrey clearly.
Yeah,
It may
same
be
with
her
me.
connection. It may be her connection, because we can all hear, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear everybody.
Okay, can I ask my question?
Sure. Go ahead. We cannot hear you if you're speaking, Audrey.
Well, back to your question, back to what you were saying about education. Can also people who are not educated be manipulated?
Yes, they can.
I think it's a question of everybody. It's related more to people who aren't in touch with themselves, as opposed to education per se.
I used education because we talk about people being manipulated. However, when I interacted with mega churches, you ask yourself, how come these people question everything except this? People are manipulated into believing that what the doctrines teach is true. And no one makes any effort to make it logical. They just say it. And the reason I use that is because especially in the church, there is a separation between those who have little or no education and those who are educated. And we talk about the manipulation of the church in general. And I want us to understand that the logic that we seek to explain things with is not only those people who are not as educated as some people. And I'm saying that education does not mean that you are going to be spiritual because of what you've been taught. That education increases the desire to have everything logically explained. The people who were our ancestors, especially grandmamas and great-grands, were not those people who were looking for something to be logically explained. And their explanation was, I know what I feel. I know what I am experiencing. And I know what God is telling me. And they talked about that. But we don't, at least I anyway, don't hear those kinds of responses or those kinds of words coming from the mega churches with all these multimillionaires in there, with all these educated people in there. It's as if they don't have the experiences that we grew up hearing from our ancestors, from our parents. We don't hear that from them. And the reason I'm saying we don't is because of their desire to understand things from a logical perspective. And that's exactly what the attempt is made to give them. When we talk to them about spirituality, since we cannot explain the essence of it or the ins and outs of it, that is rejected. But with other people who not necessarily know who they are, but they know what they experience. Does that make sense, Audrey?
It does.
Okay.
And yes, I agree that our ancestors had a certain knowing because they were, I guess the way I can describe it is they were actively pursuing some kind of connection with the Creator because of that knowing. But you have some people who whether educated or uneducated, just don't know themselves and are willing to believe whatever they hear, you know. And so I think it's not necessarily education per se. It's whether or not the person is willing to seek after that seek after their own connection to the Creator.
I can agree with that. That is not just only the educated; it's a desire, it's lack of a desire to know who they are. Because my experience with mega churches is that they don't have a knowing as ancestors did. They are more connected to that church, that building, than they are connected to God, than they are to a Creator. That building, that church, becomes the thing that they are connected with. However, when we think about, you know, our parents, grandparents, etc., what do we hear? It's a connection with the Creator. Yes, they go to that building. Yes, they talk about my church. They talk about that. But at the same time, they have a different experience. It's not about going to a church to be, because it's recognized as something special, or they better than someone else, or they dress to the nines. It was not about that with our parents, our ancestors. However, it's more about that now than ever before. It's not necessarily just mega charismatic churches. I know churches where especially in Union Farmer. I know churches that people go to simply because they are supposed to be the big shot church. That because the shakers and the movers in that town go to this church. People dress the way they dress to go to this church, and don't even realize why we dress up to go to church. The reason we dress up to go to church as a people is because we didn't have any place to dress up to go to other than the church. You couldn't dress up and go to a restaurant. You know, there was no reason, there was nothing to dress up for other than church. And now everything we believe, I'm sorry, the things that we are connected to are the material things we see with our eyes, and the political experiences that we have with people who, quote unquote, run the community. Does that make sense? Audrey?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I in all of this that you just said, Pastor, I hear the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, and arrogance about material possessions is what people who are not in touch with themselves see, because they have learned that and been taught that the God of this world is me pulling myself up by my own bootstraps, sort of thing, or me being associated or affiliated with this sorority or that society or this organization, or me wanting to dress to the nines because so and so is. It's all about when you learn all of that, then what you filter in your brain is only those things that fulfill or lead to acknowledgement that, yeah, I'm on the right track because I'm dressed to kill, kind of thing, or I know so and so and so, and I'm in the inner circle. So it's about those material, physical things that embellish the person that they've been blindly led to believe is what's important in this world. And it all goes back to what First John talks about in verse 2, I think it's 2:16, that all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh and the desire of the eyes and the arrogance produced by material possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. And so when we attach ourselves that way to physicality, to materiality, that's the logic we look for, not the illogic of Father. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, when I'm searching for physicality, that's what I see. That's what I touch. That's what I think about. That's what I know. That's all I know. And everything else is illogical. You tell me there's a spiritual essence, that's illogical to me, because my world is built on all of this physical stuff. Thank you.
And I don't see I don't see that as negativity at all. Even the description that we talked about with the mega churches and how they expect everything to be logical, I don't see that as negative at all. I see that as people who are gathered without an understanding of their reasoning for gathering. I see that as a marker to us, saying that this shows you the work that you have to do. I see that as an opportunity for us to understand the necessity in putting things in the macro, because if people are searching, then they will hear it with their soul and not necessarily with their physical ears. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what our ancestors did.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Just a little synopsis of everything that I've heard thus far since the conference started. One of the things that we need to bring attention to is I really can't give confirmation to Jesus' teachings. I wasn't there. Yet I can give confirmation to teachers. Reverend Richard, S.D., Miss Linda, Miss Cassie, Mr. Dorr, Junebug. One of the things Jesus did not do in his maneuverability, he never got intoxicated by power. Now, if I apply that to me, right now, I'm walking on top of water. I'm taking a soda cracker and a sardine, and I'm feeding an abundance of people. I'm making blind people see. Somebody got their ear chopped off. I touch their ear, bring them back whole. He hear crickets in Africa chirp. Trust me, I will be intoxicated by power because everyone gonna want to get to know me. So, in our positions of authority, whatever it is, it's never good to be intoxicated by power. So it's just not good. What was that?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Reb, if you don't, can I finish? Because I
thought you were. Go ahead.
The other thing that you need to realize about teachers that you can give confirmation to, ST, Mr. Dorr, Junebug, Miss Cassie, Miss Linda, Ron, Mr. Charles, Miss Thelma, bada bing, bada boom. They know how to keep you happy and motivated at the same time. That is a very difficult task in leading people. T.D. Jakes can keep you happy, yet can he keep you happy and motivated at the same time? And when he can keep you happy, is he keeping you motivated at the same time? So in teaching, I'm a licensed family therapist, and somebody coming to me, I got to keep them happy and motivated at the same time. If Reverend Richard is the client and I'm the licensed family therapist, first thing I'm going to establish with him is this. What's the situation that we both can learn from? Reverend Richard's smart enough to realize I'm in the ditch with him. Licensed family therapist, when people back on that wall, they won't help. You got to know how to keep them happy and motivated at the same time. I went through an abundance of licensed family therapists. And with the African American, they never kept me happy and motivated at the same time. I would say at least the European licensed family therapists, they didn't keep me happy and motivated, yet they engaged me. So that's my experience. Other people's experience could be different. When you look at being happy and motivated based upon my experience, my Aunt Shane would say, would you, Auntie? One of her favorite sayings was, you never know who's going to have to bring you a cup of water out here, and you never know who's going to have to wipe your butt. Now, she wouldn't say butt. She would say ass. And at a very young age, I knew what she was saying was endearing. I didn't realize the word endearing, yet I grasped when someone is keeping you happy and motivated, if profanity is used, in some cases, some people will perceive it as enduring. Some people will not. So happy and motivated is a very tricky arena based on educated. My experience in dealing with educated people, they can be quite humorous to me. If we were to stay in keeping people happy and motivated, and we bring in profanity, We're going to critique gangster rap and Snoop Dogg for profanity. Yes, we ain't going to say nothing about.
George,
Yes.
I find it disgusting. I find it that people who have to use profanity in order to express themselves are not sure of themselves. They do it for the shock value rather than for the educational value. They do it for the shock value rather than an explanation. Profanity serves a purpose of with the shock value of closing people out. People shut down when they began to hear that. You can say what you choose about gangster rap and any of anytime. The most of the profanity is directed at females and directed at us as a people by the people who look like us. Therefore, I discount as much as I can that. Why? Because you can get your message across without profane language. If you cannot get your message across without profanity, then you don't have a message to give as far as I'm concerned.
And okay, Rev, I respect your opinion. However, that's the beauty of the world. Everybody don't think like you think, and everybody don't think like I think. However, all I'm saying with this is, and keeping people happy and motivated, Mike Krzyzewski of Duke University, he used profanity. And educated people will say,
no. George, that's not what I'm talking about at all. That's not what I'm talking about. If you look at that historically, we have always had enough respect for each other not to have to go to that. It only became acceptable when I can't remember Clive, whoever he is. It only became acceptable when the people who own record companies began to publish the music. And what happened is it became a part of our vernacular, not because we wanted it, but because we were flooded with it. We were indoctrinated with it from a young age. And young people today has very little respect for anyone older than them or anyone who don't think like them. And it's not because of a cultural thing, it's because of an indoctrinational thing for money. It all goes back to money. And it's not my opinion alone. It is a cultural thing. My opinion is never cultural. My truth is cultural. Now, I don't want to dwell on that anymore because there is something else that you said. You said that you could not authenticate Jesus' teaching because you were not there. Well, first of all, Jesus, the whole Bible is an allegory. And the allegory was not written for people who were there at that period of time when the allegory was offered. The allegory stands the test of time. The reason if people find it difficult to accept what Jesus taught is because they don't know what he taught. When you sit there and read the temptations that we dealt with and what they really mean, who do you know was taught the meaning of what was taking place there? So no, if you sit there and read the teachings verbatim, and if you accept them as being the actual words, if you read them literally, then according to the sages, we are literal fools. The scriptures say it's so simple that even a fool can understand it. However, in order to understand it, we must look at the original. So no, there are a number of people who don't accept, respect the teachings of Jesus simply because the way that they have been translated, they do not make sense. They don't make sense. When it comes to Jesus, they're always talking about a devil that doesn't exist. That does not make sense. However, when you look at what that means, it makes all the sense in the world. When we see that it's an adversarial thought as opposed to a devil, that is totally different than how it is translated and interpreted during messages or during teachings. So to say that you can authenticate ours because we're teaching it, we are teaching the same thing that Jesus taught or that this allegory references, the same exact thing. So to authenticate what we teach is automatically authenticating what Jesus taught, because that's what we are teaching. We are teaching based upon the original language that Jesus spoke. The original language that all of these sayings were written in. Years ago, when I said just read the red, I had no clue as to what I was saying and the power that was in it. Now I see it, because everything else is annotated. This is not. This is what he said. Let's understand this, and everything else will take care of itself. So the thing that stung me the most was when you mentioned that about the I can't authenticate the teaching of Jesus because I wasn't there. Yes, you were there. You're here now. And there's always the now. Jesus did not go any place, because if Jesus had gone, then there would not be the allegories that we're reading, that we're studying from. Does that make sense to you guys? I'm done. Are you finished?
Questions? George, are you done? Did that make sense to you?
It makes sense to me. However, it's just that if I can't give confirmation to it, I just can't give confirmation to it. I wasn't there. I didn't see Jesus walk on water, and I'm not saying that it did not exist. I believe that at one time we jumped from planet to planet. I didn't see it, yet I do believe it. I'm just saying I can't speak about something I can't give confirmation to. If someone asks me, hey, George, blah, 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 I can't speak on that. Don't get me to start lying.
I'm going to ask you a question.
I wasn't there.
I'm going to ask you a question. So why is it you can give confirmation to our teaching? And we're teaching
because
something.
It's tangible.
Well, but we're teaching.
It's tangible.
No, it came from a teacher. We weren't there, George. We were not there.
Reb, it's tangible to me where I can at least ask a question.
Okay. Okay.
It's no different than if I'm talking to my daddy's era and I'm talking about something that happened in the 50s. Now, look, you wasn't there. You don't know enough about that. It's the same thing.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that Jesus did. I'm saying I can't give confirmation.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
I didn't say that it didn't exist. Thank you.
We good. Because I'm not saying that you said it didn't exist. I'm good with that. I used the word confirmation. However, we agree to disagree. And I'm good with that.
Everybody else good with that? Because I'm good with it.
Okay.
Miss Barbara, Miss Audrey, Ron, y'all good with that?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes.
All right. I'm good with it.
Okay. Kath.
Good morning. I wanted to go back to education, if we may take just a moment. And I guess when you talk about education, I may be looking at it in a different way, and so correct me if I'm incorrect, but education can be formal or informal. So when we're talking about education, everyone, life in and of itself is an education. And so regardless of whether you were in a formal setting where you were taught a particular thing or trained a certain way, the mindset that you live with each day comes from the education that you receive from the life and the journey in which you're living. Weeks ago about changing or uprooting that European mindset. To me, that pours into every aspect of anyone's life, whether you went to third grade in school or whether you have a PhD, you are still being educated in some way. And if you are not on the journey of self-discovery and understanding who you are, you will be influenced by whatever is in that journey that is called your life.
Can you hear Kathy? Ron, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure because
so when we are talking about, I'll speak up. So when we're talking about education, I don't see a time when we are not being educated. No matter where you live, no matter what you do, no matter where you go, life is an education. And until you recognize that on this journey of life, there is something bigger than what I see with my eyes and begin to go internally and seek who I am and begin to see with my eye in search of self, then yes, I will always be the man that is carnal, not understanding the journey in which he's on. So I don't want to divvy up education, or it's hard for me to divvy up education into those that have a degree. When you say education, life educates you, regardless of what you have that man hands you from a graduation or whatever, you are still being educated in some format, in my opinion. And one other note, as a counselor / therapist, our goal is never to motivate and to keep you happy. Our goal is always to help you find the discovery of who you are and the truth in which you are able to live with. Because you can't live my truth and I can't live your truth. If you're coming there seeking help, my goal is to help you discover who you are in this situation and your truth in that situation. Truth does not always make you happy. Sometimes truth can devastate you and you need help being put back together to move forward from that truth. But it's not about motivating and keeping you happy, because it's not a minstrel show where I'm juggling and trying to keep you going. It's about you discovering who you are in that scenario in which you're coming into the counseling for. So I wanted to add those two things, and that's all I have, and thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I was talking about a formal education, and I did not delineate that. So you I agree with what you're saying totally, no question about that. I just did not separate what I was talking about. Any other questions or comments about what Kathy said? Ron?
Okay. When we started off, y'all, we went straight into Matthew chapter 4. And I want to back up just a bit and see if there are any questions about anything else. Any questions or comments about anything that has come to your attention that you want clarity on, that you want to inform us about, please feel free.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ron, if you can hear me, this is George of Philly. I just wanted to respond to what Kathy mentioned in reference to education. And I think we may have briefly spoke about it before, but when we look at, the ancient civilization and we talk about, education from our ancestors, is basically we're saying that education has, one aim, and that was to be in oneness with the Creator, one with God, or to become like God. And so when we talk about, education in terms of how we look at it academically, but I think that there was a spiritual aspect of our journey where it came back to being that oneness, with God. And that was the whole aim of education in Egypt. And I think that as we, were talking about the aspect of perception in terms of our senses or even our recepts as far as what we see, the images, I think it still comes back down to that self-consciousness where I think, or I believe that we're moving into that realm of intuitive instinct or cosmic consciousness from a standpoint of being able to discern the scriptures or to be able to discern what we've been taught from a European Christian education perspective and looking at it now from that spiritual realm. So I think, again, I just wanted to reiterate what the whole aim of education was, again, in Kemet, in terms of just being, one with God. I just wanted to share those thoughts. I'm done. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
And that, see, when you bring that up, what comes to my mind is this. In the African community, following slavery, all education was done in the church. All teachings, because we didn't have schools. And the church was the school, the Masonic Lodge, etc. Everything happened in that building, which gave us a sense of community. But the deeper we delve into education for a job, as Kathy put, formal education, the further away we got further away from spirituality. We got further away from God if the more educated we became. And that happened for a reason. If you can remove people from their spiritual foundation, they are easy to control. If you look at it, not only from the perspective of the church component of our lives, but if you look at it historically, the first thing that happened with the African was separating from its spiritual beliefs. You cannot have the spiritual belief and practice your spirituality in this land during slavery. If you do, you die. So when you separate people from spirituality, their creator, they are more easily controlled. So what do? You separate them from the real essence of their spirituality, and you do it by killing them. And at the same time, you do it by introducing something to them to replace that. And the something that you introduce to them to replace that is something that you are using as a tool of control. And that tool of control killed when we talked about earlier about the knowing that Audrey mentioned about our foreparents. That was killed, not simply during slavery, but that was killed when African preachers started going to seminaries. That's when it was killed. And the very people who wrote the books that they were studying from were the people like Schofield, Matthew Henry. These books that they were using in seminary denigrated our existence. And they knew that. Yet they did not feel like they were accepted, could be accepted as a spiritual a preacher unless they went to seminary. Where did they get that from? The same people who wrote the sermon or had to approve the sermon that Nat Turner preached, that same people are the ones who said, if you don't have a seminary degree, you're not a real preacher. So now what happens is we go to seminary and we lose all our essence of who we are. And now we're looking for a bigger salary as opposed to making every effort to bring us back to the foundation of spirituality, the foundation of knowing who we are in relationship to our Creator, in relationship to God. So now where are we? We are so far away from it until church becomes a source of entertainment, as opposed to a community that's truly searching for its spirituality, truly searching for its foundation. And the foundation that we grew up with, was a foundation from a group of people who did not go to seminary, who did not necessarily have a formal education, didn't matter. They had a knowing. And regardless of what was coming across that pulpit, they did not lose their knowing. That's what kept us grounded. The loss of that, was devastating to us. And now what we are doing, we are simply recovering or uncovering the spiritual basis, the spiritual foundation that we had when we were brought across the ocean. That's what we are doing. We can call it anything we want, but we are discovering or uncovering that spiritual foundation. And we were brought to this country for that purpose. The Creator allowed us to be transported across the ocean for that purpose. There is no way that anyone, that any group of people could survive that journey without the Creator being a guiding force in it, a source of life in it. And when we look at the spiritual foundation that was snatched away from us, it does not matter whether you came from Ghana or Nigeria. Your spiritual foundation is the same. The only thing that was different was the languages. So I say all of that to say this. It is imperative that we embrace the reality of the spiritual foundation that was snatched away from us. But in order to do that, we go through that stage of knowing, just like our foreparents had, knowing that there were people, primarily females, older, who were old enough to be my parent or my grandparent, who said things to me, about other people, and every bit of it was true. I was thinking about this last night, and one of the things I was thinking about last night was the things that Miss Sophie and Miss Sally White and my grandmama would say in regards to me, regardless of how crazy I was acting, and how older people and older ministers who were not seminarian, who could barely read, would look and say things like, God got his hand on you. I didn't know what that meant. I was too young to know. And then when I got older, my question was, how they know? God didn't tell me he got his hand on me. I don't feel it. So what was that? Why was my response the way it was? My response was the way it was because a system was taken away from me, the knowing that was being given to me. A system did that. And and right now, excuse me, right now we wrestle with that same system. And that system that took it away from us is the system that controlled our minds. And the knowing comes from the soul. And we elevated our minds over our soul. As a matter of fact, we believe that the only time the soul came into play is whether you went to heaven or hell. But everything else was our mind. And now we are beginning to give priority to our soul. And that is the reason we are able to see further than we've ever seen with our eye as opposed to our eyes. And that is the reason the Aramaic says the stinging mind. A sting hurts. The stinging mind hurts. It hurts us. And we don't even know it is hurting us. And the hurt that we experience is not physical, it's spiritual pain that we experience. And that is the reason when things come to us, circumstances present themselves to us contrary to what we expect or what we desire, we fall apart because we're doing it with our minds. We're processing with our minds. When we begin to process with our soul, what do we see? Every circumstance that's presented to me is telling me there's something you need to deal with. That's how we see that with our eye. Every circumstance that presents itself is telling me there is something here to make you stronger than what you were. But with the mind, it tells you you got to figure out how to deal with this thing. And when you can't figure out how to deal with it, what do people? They go into a state of depression. They jump out of windows. They cuss everybody out. They go all these crazy things. And every single one of us have traveled that course. And if you haven't traveled that course, you're lying to yourself. So we are at the stage now where embracing the soul, we began to see it's not about me and mine. It's about everyone. It's about all of us. It's about me recognizing that I am everyone and everyone is me. That's from the soul. Does that make sense? Any questions or comments? Ron?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So that's why you say we all connect. And I'm seeing it like we don't have to be in one place or the other place, but we're all connected with the same source. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. See, think about it this way. The rain is not connected to the river in terms of physicality. It's not connected to the river. But both of them are H2O water. But they do connect when it rains. You see? So what I'm saying is, when you know who you are, it's just like rain. Because you're connected to the source. There is no rain without a river. There's no river without an ocean. If there's no water flowing on this land, there's no rain. Because that rain is simply water that's been separated from all the other water that's on this earth. And if you look at it scientifically, water is not supposed to be on the ground, flowing as a river. Because of its molecular makeup, it should be floating. Because of how light the molecular makeup is. If you look at it scientifically. But when we look at it spiritually, we understand the reason it's on the ground. It's on the ground because we are ground. It's on the ground because that's our makeup more than anything else, water. And that's something we can't not live without, water. So the connection, we cannot live without each other. We can't do that. I don't want to get into this, but I want to challenge you. I want you to look at something for yourself. Do the research and find out what you see about the origin of wars between people. Where did it come from? I don't want any responses now. I want you to look at that for yourself. And when you look at that for yourself, what you will find is the place where the disconnect started. Disconnection started with wars. There is no way that you can believe that you are me and I'm you and you go kill me. You have a desire to kill me. Because if you believe that I am you and you are me, then you're killing yourself. If you truly believe that. Does that make sense? But I want you to look at that for yourself. I'm done.
Questions, y'all? Comments?
I have a comment. I like the way, I understand what Pastor's saying too, but I like also how the Manhattans would say, there's no me without you.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say.
And that's exactly it. The last thing I want to say is,
go ahead, Pastor. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We lost our affinity for each other when we allowed our incomes to move us out of communities and put us in neighborhoods. It's a huge difference in community and neighbors. In the community that I live in, most of the time my doors are not locked. In the community that I live in, everyone knows everyone. And you say, well, my neighborhood is so big. No. Every one of us has lived in a community before and knew everybody in it. Think about it. Every one of us who, when we were in school, we knew practically everyone in that building, did we not? Neighborhoods is the force that separates. Community is a force that maintains a connection, a unicity with each other. I'm done.
Questions, y'all? Anybody? Questions about anything? I don't know when. Maybe if we get maybe come back up tomorrow. Maybe it's a good place to pause. But George brought up something interesting, as a lot of the questions do. A lot of the questions are comments, kind of show us where we are and give us an opportunity to pause and to look at things. And one of the things I got from that I hope we can maybe discuss and bring some more clarity to is spirituality, and what we study has nothing to do with history or time or I'm there or not there. your state of mind, your desire puts you in the here and now and in the presence, that opens the door for everything. And maybe we can talk about that again. And I think one of the most powerful things that we discussed this weekend that sounded so simple was being vulnerable. What that means. What does that mean to when we look at that from the perspective of masculinity and femininity? What does that mean when we discuss it from the perspective of the mind versus the soul? So maybe talking about those things again and putting them in a little more perspective, or bring a little clarity to that, because as we've discussed before, and I believe that a lot of the questions come up is what the universe needs. So when George said, because I wasn't there, that spoke to me, and I would like to, I don't necessarily have to address it, but I would like for somebody to at some point. So maybe it'd be a good place to start the next time we convene, if nothing else comes up. Is that okay? Does that sound all right to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that sounds simple, like vulnerability sounded, but it's more in than we can see right now. Because the moment you brought that up, I saw some things that connects to that. So yes, sir.
Okay. So if you guys don't mind, if there are no more questions or comments, we'll go ahead and pause for today, and resume tomorrow afternoon at 6. And we may look at this, not depend on your questions, and we'll pick up from there. Okay. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks again, everybody who was on today, had a question or comment. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. You too.